I want to talk about pseudo-classes and pseudo-elements. Let's define what each of these is because they're not the same thing. A pseudo-class targets the state of an element, like whether it's being focused, hovered, selected, or even its location in the DOM. So let's take an anchor element with the pseudo-classes focus, hover, and active. Focus is the keyboard or touch focus. Hover is the user hovering over it. Active is the user actively clicking it. Now, these are the most common pseudo-classes I use to style both links and buttons, but these aren't new elements. They are the same element, just in a different state of interaction. State can also mean other things. So we could have input checked. This is the state of being selected. Or list item, first child. This is the state of position in the DOM. We also could have form invalid. That is the state of validation. So when we talk about state, we're not just talking about interactivity, we are talking about anything that changes how the browser understands the element in that moment. And according to MDN, there are 76 pseudo-classes grouped into categories like elemental, form input, location, user action. There are lots. I only use a handful regularly, like root, not, has, focus within, and nth of type. Those are probably the second most common group of pseudo-classes that I use, but there are so many more that are genuinely useful and honestly really surprising. The list is extensive, and I'll leave it linked below so you can take a look for yourself. So in short, pseudo-classes let us style elements based on what's true about them right now, whether they're focused, selected, the first in a list, or matching some other condition. Next are pseudo-elements, which let us style a specific part of an element. They're added with double colons, although browsers do support single colon syntax for before, after, first line, and first letter. These are the original 4 pseudo-elements. But they don't exist on their own. They must have an originating element, so think div or span, but really you can add them to almost anything. You can't, however, add them to images, which is considered a replaced element with content determined by an external resource. So if you're trying to add one to an image and it's not working, this is why. The pseudo elements I use most often are before and after. Before adds an element as the first child, and after adds an element as the last child. They behave like regular elements, they respect the box model, and can be styled just like any other child of the selected element. Pseudo elements like before and after are also display inline by default, but you can change the display property to whatever works for you. So block, inline block, flex, anything you want. Some pseudo-elements are browser determined, like marker. So if you aren't sure, just open your DevTools in whatever browser you're working in to check the user agent style sheet. That's where you'll see the browser's default styles. It's also worth noting that before and after require the content property to be present, or they'll behave like display none. So even if you aren't adding content, you at least need the content property for them to be valid. MDN lists 29 pseudo-elements, and I'll leave that link down below so you can check that out. They're also grouped into categories like typographic pseudo-elements, tree-abiding pseudo-elements, element-backed pseudo-elements, and a lot more. My approach to using pseudo-elements has evolved into implementing things that are purely decorative and don't rely on or interfere with accessibility. So think background graphics, color, or texture gradients, things that aren't vital to the user experience, but rather add a layer of visual enhancement to your design. Avoid using pseudo-elements for meaningful images or content that need to be indexed or announced by a screen reader, because they're not part of the DOM, they don't support alt text, and they can't be indexed by search engines. I've been using the terms pseudo-class and pseudo-element interchangeably for years, and now I know what the difference is. A casual catch-all term is pseudo-selector, but that's not an official part of the CSS spec. There's a lot to know about pseudo-classes and pseudo-elements, and the best way to get to know them is to use them in your projects. Start to get a feel for what works best for you, and if you haven't used them yet, I think you'll be surprised by how convenient they really are. Happy coding!